on the recognition of Palestinian statehood. High Representative, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me...
Suur tänu, härra juhataja. Kõigepealt ma tahaksin öelda, kui palju ma hindan seda, et ma saan olla siin täna esimest korda oma mandaadi raames. Esimesed 3+ nädalat olen seda tööd teinud ning ma tahaksin teile kinnitada ning ka Euroopa Parlamendile kinnitada seda, et me saaksime ehk pöörduda tagasi sellisele nime juurde kõrge esindaja asepresident. Aluslepingutes on see kirjas, mingil juhul ei ole vaja neid tiitlit ümber vahetada, kinnitan seda poliitiliselt teile. Nii et aluslepingud on meie töö aluseks, sisus ja vormis. Kõigepealt suur tänu selle ajakohase debati eest. See debatt on väga õigeaegne just pidada praegu. Käisin oma esimesel töönädalal Iisraelis ja Palestiinas, sealhulgas ka Gazas, Jeruusalemmas ja Läänekaldal ning ma võin teile teatada, nii nagu ka nõukogule teada andsin, kuivõrd kiireloomuline on see küsimus regioonis mõlemale osapoolele. Olukorrad on väga erinevad kummalgi osapoolel ning tegemist on väga pingelise olukorraga, kus poliitilise perspektiivi puudus on nii põhjus järelm, vägivalla põhjus ja järelm ning risk on sellesse tagasi langeda. Me nägime terroristirünnakuid ühelt poolt ning teiselt poolt seda, et igal juhul 2 riigi lahendus on ohus. See kiireloomulisus muutub iga päevaga akuutsemaks, sellepärast et poliitilise perspektiivi ja lahenduse puudus on praegu. Viimaste kuude jooksul oleme me näinud, et läbirääkimised on peatatud eelmise aasta kevadel, siis konflikt Gazas ning
in the region and internationally, starting from Egypt, the reachment of the ceasefire in the end of August, then a donors conference not many weeks ago, always in Cairo. Still, all of this is not reopening the way to a political perspective, to direct talks or to steps that can bring back hope in the fact that what we call the two-state solution can become a reality in the near future. We have some open points. On one side, we have the dramatic open point of Gaza, where I've seen a desperate situation, where we have seen that the Palestinian Authority has more than difficulties in doing what we all hope it could do, go to rule Gaza, starting from the security side and the control of the crossings. And we have on the other side decisions like the one of the settlements that is actually going in an opposite direction rather than the one indicated by the agreed negotiations. In this framework, I think this debate today about the role that the European Union can have in this process is crucial. That's why I decided to go in my first week in office, because we are the first trade partner for Israel and we are the first donor for the Palestinian Authority. And we can be the first political player in the region to facilitate a dialogue that has to be a direct dialogue between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but that maybe for the first time really has the chance of becoming regional. I've seen in my visit, and I've shared that with the member states of the European Union also, the fact that maybe for the first time we have such a dramatic threat and challenge in the region, in the Middle East, namely Daesh, that poses a different set of priorities to the actors of the region. And I've seen an awareness, both in Israel and in Palestine, that the order of priorities is changing, not only in the region but also in Europe, also on the other side of the Atlantic, also for the international community, but that we have a clear possibility there to unite different actors that now share the same concern for security and stability of the region. We have threats in the regional framework today, but we also maybe have out of these threats an opportunity. On the other side, the vacuum that is there and is risking to be even more relevant, especially in Gaza, given the regional framework, could lead to more dangerous outcomes. The situation in Gaza, either it gets better on the ground or it risks to open the way for a more worrying situation in terms of who controls what in that territory and who networks with whom in the region. That's why I think it would be wise from my side today not only to listen to you, to the debate, but also to try and give you some inputs on what kind of political elements we can have as European Union to restart a peace process, to restart a political process, a political perspective. I would start from the regional framework. I believe that in 2002 the Arab Peace Initiative was probably a missed opportunity, and that could constitute today one of the elements of a renewed effort regionally and internationally to put actors on the table, because we know around the table, because we know that we have a Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but we also know that we have an Arab-Israeli conflict that we have to work on, and maybe this set of threats and opportunities in the region could give us an opportunity to work on the Middle East peace process on a broader scale and include in particular not only the Arab League that is going to have the ministerial meeting this weekend and that is for sure listening carefully to the messages that are coming from here today, but also to some key Arab countries. Egypt for sure, not only for the role that it has played historically and in the last months, but also because it has a certain leverage on Gaza through Rafah, but also Jordan, as it has a special role on the status of the holy sites in Jerusalem, and I would mention also Saudi Arabia as the initiator of the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002. I can share here with you the thoughts that I have shared with the Member States during the last Foreign Affairs Council on the need to have a European Union initiative together with this Arab League and Arab states, in particular with the US. I'm in constant contact with John Kerry, that is renewing his commitment to reopen the way for negotiations, and with the UN, also because we know that the UN Security Council could be a way to redefine the framework of an initiative. And I would mention the UN Security Council in a way, in a vision, not to have a resolution that could split, but rather unite the international actors to find a solution. The European Union effort in these same weeks, is to try and put that framework together. I will take into, not more than into account, I will take note of your debate today, because I believe that the parliamentary debate, and then if you are going to take a vote on this next month, can fit in the process of a European common approach. You know very well that the recognition of a state is not within the competences of the European Union. This is a competence technically and politically, responsibility of member states, of single member states. But I would never say to you, as I have not said that to the ministers of the member states when we had the Foreign Affairs Council last week, that this is not my business. This is obviously technically not my business, but politically it is, because I believe that we need, and I appreciate the drafts that I've seen of the resolutions that encourage me to do so. I think that we need to share a vision, to share a common understanding of the situation, and also, if we manage, and I think the European Parliament can help me in that, can help us in that, also to shape a common European approach of national initiatives that could go in the same direction. In this, I think that the European Parliament can play a very important role. The message that is coming today, I will take the chance of replying at the end of the debate, but to me today it's also important to listen to the orientation that comes from the European Parliament, knowing that only if we will manage to take into account all the different views and try to make a common view of these different views, both coming from different political groups or from different member states, we will have the chance of playing our role at full in the region. Only if we send united messages as European Union in the region, our potential can be really used. And here comes also a good leverage that you have in terms of parliamentary diplomacy. Don't underestimate it. I will do all that I can, and I know that you can count on that. But you also have some instruments, some important instruments, in your daily or weekly or monthly contacts with the counterparts there. If we manage to send a united and strong message, we probably have a chance of influencing the course of the events in the Middle East. And I would like to state what is already our common position, but sometimes we just refer to the two-state solution as a slogan. And I think it's useful that we name what this means, because I was surprised by the fact that when I said, when I was in Israel and Palestine, we need a Palestinian state. Surprise. Well, the two-state solution means that we need to have an Israeli state that is able to live in security, and this is an issue we have to deal with, and also a Palestinian state that we do not have at the moment. So when I said also publicly, we can discuss of the recognition of a Palestinian state. Some member states are doing that in national parliaments. You are going to have a debate in this parliament, and I will be listening to your orientation on that very carefully. National governments are going to take decisions or not, in this time or later. But the important thing, I believe, is that we all work towards the same goal with the most effective instruments, coordinating these instruments if we manage, and that's my responsibility, to get these results done. And these results are the creation of a Palestinian state within the 67 borders, with swaps, if agreed, with Jerusalem capital of the two states. And this is already agreed. This is a consensual common position, historical position. But I think it's right that we go into the details of what our historical position is, to remind ourselves what does it mean, a two-state solution. And with the right of Israel not only to exist, but to exist in security and safety and peace in the region. And with all the Palestinians, being them in West Bank, in Jerusalem or in Gaza, having one state, finally. I am looking forward to listen to your contributions to that, and I will take note of that in this framework. That of someone that knows very well that opinions that are expressed in Parliament, even if they are not, as it is in this case, targeted to an imminent decision that can become operational, because it's not in the power of the European Parliament, as it is not in the power of the High Representative / Vice President to recognise a state. It is our common responsibility to work together to achieve the goal that I just stated. The creation of a Palestinian state in these elements, in this framework, and a work with Israel to guarantee peace and security in the region. I believe, I said that to the Israelis, I said to the Palestinians, and I'm saying that to the Arab countries of the region, there is no way of having security if we do not also have a Palestinian state. There is no way of having a Palestinian state if we do not guarantee security, stability and peace also to the Israelis. That is the very same concept, the core of the efforts that the European Union has always worked on. Today it's probably more difficult than ever, but sometimes it's when it is more difficult that people around the table realise that a plus of political will and internal leadership is needed and might make an effort in that direction. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Colleagues, before we enter into the debate, let me tell you that we have about 60 speakers on the list. I will therefore ask for your understanding if I am relatively strict with the time allotted. The first speaker on behalf of the European People's Party for 2 minutes, Elmar BROK.
Mr. President, Madam Vice President, colleagues, the majority of Palestinians and the majority of Israelis want peace. They want peace on the basis of a two-state solution. But there are forces on the Palestinian side, such as Hamas, that do not want a two-state solution and are exercising violence from Gaza. And there are also some Israelis who don't want this either, and some of them sit in the government, in fact, and they don't want a two-state solution. And the situation is getting dangerous again. On the one hand, you need to open up Gaza and allow it to develop, but on the other hand, Israel has a right to expect not to have rockets fired at it from Gaza, so these things go together. The fact that we have this issue of the Temple Mount and the assault on the synagogue shows how dangerous it is when politics and religion get mixed up. And, of course, the whole question of the settlements speaks for itself. The aim is a two-state solution with a safe Israeli start and a viable Palestinian state side by side. And this is only possible on the basis of mutual recognition, as the High Representative has just made clear at the end of her statement. The one requires the other. You can't recognize one thing until the other is recognized. There is a clear link between the two. And I think that the United Nations and the United States' idea of being not just the biggest donors, but being the biggest players, I think that is an important point. I think the EU should be taking more political initiative alongside the UN and the US. And we must stress the role as well of Arab states in the peace process. We need to do more to create the capacity to resolve this conflict that has consequences well beyond the region, is taking on more and more importance. So I hope that we will be able to arrive at a common position, because I'm afraid the microphone has been lost for Mr. Brok. If we don't manage to do so, we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult situation. We have to try to make our contribution to a peaceful development.
Thank you very much indeed. Also for 2 minutes on behalf of the S&D, Mr. Howitt.
This debate is quite simply saying that if we support a two-state solution, then we must support Palestine as a state. It's an attempt to break the deadlock in which the viability of the two-state solution is increasingly questioned, to avoid a new apartheid, which some say is already here. We used to talk about a roadmap, but that's been forgotten, and this is an attempt to restart the journey. To our Israeli friends, your representative called this move, giving the Palestinians a state on, quote, as a silver platter, some platter. But as my own party has said in Britain, Palestinian statehood is not a gift to be given, it is a right to be recognised. Our move today is supported by former Israeli ambassadors to France, Turkey and South Africa, the former Israeli Attorney General and the former Speaker of the Knesset. They are not anti-Israel, and I promise you neither are we. My group absolutely joins the condemnation of the horrendous Har Nof synagogue bombing. But the conclusion we draw from this and other terrorist acts is that status quo is not guaranteeing peace and security for the Israeli people. To those who have argued for delay this week, why should parliaments in Spain, France, Sweden, Ireland, the United Kingdom and now Denmark take the initiative, but not this European Parliament? So my friends in the European People's Party, your current offer is to say recognition can only be the outcome of successful talks. But that is only restating what is already the case. But we share your concern that this must be a contribution towards talks, and I restate our willingness to find with you a good compromise on this point. To our Palestinian friends, we recognise that you have held back on asking us to do this until now, and we recognise that international recognition is vital to maintaining hope amongst your people to sustain political support for peace. Why should the European Parliament act? Because there is impatience at the continued settlement building and a despair at the continuing death toll. Because, as we have already heard from Ms Mogherini, EU foreign ministers are discussing this and that there are merits to a common EU approach. And because on the day of the award of the Sakharov Prize, our Parliament should remember the Israeli woman who we gave the Sakharov Prize in 2001, who lost her own child to a Palestinian suicide bomber, who asked us to support this proposal. Given what she lost and what she asked us, who are we to disagree?
Thank you very much. Are you prepared to answer a blue card from Mr. Carver? Yes, Mr. Carver, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does Mr. Harris accept that one of the largest stumbling blocks towards a lasting peace is the Hamas call for the destruction of the State of Israel? Does he agree with me that were Hamas to revoke this core principle, then it could lead to a fresh, everlasting approach?
I'm absolutely for Hamas and everyone else recognising the right of Israel to exist and peace and security for the Israeli people. My group will always speak out against terrorism, but these terrorist acts are killing Israelis as Palestinians were killed in Gaza. The status quo is failing, and my group believes that this initiative in recognising the Palestinian state can provide the extra impetus which could finally bring talks to success and peace to the Middle East. This is a vote for peace.
Thank you very much. The next speaker, on behalf of the ECR Group, for 2 minutes, Charles Tannock.
Mr. President, we in this House all dream of the day when we may welcome the end of the hostilities and when peace between Israel and the Palestinians will finally be achieved in the Middle East. For as long as I've been an MEP, the debate as to how we can in fact realise this objective has been a matter of fierce exchange in this House and elsewhere. My group, the ECR, accepts that lasting peace can only be achieved when all sides return to the negotiating table in order to bring about a two-state solution. We support this two-state solution as being the only feasible outcome for long-term peace and stability, and we are fully committed to working towards the eventual recognition of a sovereign, independent, democratic and viable Palestinian state which may peacefully coexist alongside Israel based on the 1967 borders with land for peace swaps. However, I personally have deep concerns regarding whether this particular motion today for unilateral recognition of Palestine is indeed premature. The dual needs of mutual recognition and concrete security arrangements on the ground, which are of paramount importance in achieving peace, would not be addressed by EU member states granting immediate symbolic recognition to a fledgling Palestinian state. Furthermore, there are fears that this resolution might endanger peace by facilitating a hardening of the Palestinian position towards more intransigence and preventing a lasting mutual recognition. This will all require much compromise in order to achieve the final agreement. Thus, such unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state at this stage, in my view, would arguably not assist in bringing Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas to the negotiating table, but might actually result in pushing the two sides further apart. We must recognise a Palestinian state at a time most helpful to the peace process and have first resolved the question of Gaza under Hamas, which is an EU-designated terrorist organisation. Whilst I have serious reservations as to whether this resolution is a good idea at this time, solving this issue will nevertheless remain a foreign policy priority. for the ECR. And I agree with you, Madam High Representative, the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative is a very good place to start the negotiations, even still today, a decade later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For 2 minutes, on behalf of the Liberal Group, Fernando Maura Barandarian.
President,
over the last few years, there has been a rise in the lack of confidence in European citizens vis-à-vis the European institutions. They see them as being distant, excessively slow and bureaucratic, old and incapable of action. And now this question of the resolution on the recognition of Palestine statehood, we are turning round and giving back to the citizens the answer for what we're being criticised for. We have been promoting human dignity, but what can we do in the face of the, we've talked about protecting just causes. We've raised our voice when necessary, but I think we are coming back to the situation. I would say that, I think that we have to put the fundamental values in front of the interests. And in this constantly changing, rapidly changing world, we need to act as a protagonist here in this Parliament, not following the member states. We have to establish what the interests are and set the priorities of our states on the basis of the common values which constitute the mortar in the European Union. We cannot hang behind decisions. We have to be at the cutting edge. Colleagues, the brave announcement by the Swedish Parliament that it was going to recognise the Palestinian state should be the start of a new wave of international recognition which we should support. We cannot continue to just fall back on public resources and not help reconstruct this area where the Palestinians and Israelis are in conflict. We have to be at the head of the international search for a solution on a two-state basis that can exist in state and prosperity, in peace and prosperity. And we have spoken out in favour of that for decades now, and so our political responsibility is to help this decision to materialise as quickly as possible. We can't delay it any longer. I think that recognising Palestine will be a step to be remembered by future generations as being a decision taken by Europe to put itself on the right side of history. Recognition of the Palestinian state would be a recognition of peace. Thank you.
Für die Gruppe der Vereinigten Europäischen
On behalf of the GUE, we now have Martina ANDERSON for 1.5 minutes.
35 countries already recognise Palestinian statehood, which represents approximately 80% of the world's population. This includes 8 EU member states, most recently Sweden. There have been resolutions passed in Ireland and Britain calling for recognition of Palestinian statehood. Similar debates will take place in France, Belgium and Denmark. The Israeli onslaught in Gaza this summer has showed that the status quo is not acceptable to the millions we represent and who protested, and it shouldn't be acceptable to anyone who genuinely supports a peaceful and just resolution. Those who claim that the Palestinian state recognition would negatively impact on future negotiations ignore the reality that 20 years of negotiations have advanced little and have reinforced Israel's occupation, which consistently undermines a two-state solution through settlement expansion and land confiscation. The international community needs to influence change by action because the worrying situation emerging in East Jerusalem and the preposterous Jewish state bill demonstrates clearly that Israel is not a serious partner for peace. Recognising the state of Palestine on the 1967 borders will send a clear message that the international community and the EU is opposed to occupation and committed to a two-state solution involving two fully fledged recognised states as outlined by the High Representative, Israel and Palestine.
Thank you very much. For the group of the Greens, now Tamás MESZERICS for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
First of all, let me thank you, Madam High Commissioner, for sharing with us your thoughts about the thorny question of the Israeli-Palestine conflict and about the recognition of the State of Palestine as part of the two-state solution. Thank you for expressing your openness to note. Sorry? Thank you for expressing your openness to note the results of this debate and to take into consideration your further steps. And I especially welcome that you expect from the EU and from this chamber a united and strong message. Sorry. No translation. I'm very sorry for speaking this minority language here in the European Parliament.
No. we noted that. We noted that, but apparently Mr. Gollnisch does not have translation. Do you have translation now? Yes, and even better Japanese. So please do continue.
Thank you very much. So I especially welcome your call for a united and strong message coming from this very chamber, but let me just tell you that a united and strong message that you, Madam, expect from us could have come forward more easily have we had the opportunity to debate a resolution with this debate. The fact that we cannot debate a resolution seems to be a slight majority at the time in Monday, but I very much hope that the result of the debate would change the mind of many of those who voted for removing the resolution from the table. I understand what my colleagues on the right are saying, that we have to do a lot for a comprehensive peace settlement. We have to help both Palestinians and the Israeli side for going back to the negotiating table and achieving lasting results. And I understand that we are far from it. There is a lot to do. Nobody denies that. And we Greens very much hope that the EU will be among the most important partners to help that bring about. But for the life of me, I cannot understand how that can be hampered, how that can be objected by actually recommending to the member states the recognition of the Palestine states on the basis of the 1967 borders now. And it's not just me who doesn't understand that. Let me offer you a quote. Recognition of Palestine helps to preserve the two-state solution, which is the policy of all responsible political parties in Europe. It rewards and encourages moderation on both sides. This sentence is not coming from what my conservative friends sometimes call the loony left. It doesn't come from a raving anti-Semitic extreme right. Actually, it's come from Sir Vincent Feehan, who served as British Consul General in Jerusalem for 4 years. I cannot get a higher authority on that, except possibly Alon Leal, who shares these thoughts and who shared his thoughts on this as being a former General Secretary of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Actually, if we are worried, rightly, that the European Union is becoming lame, then actually we should be worried because we are making it lame unless we vote immediately for the recognition of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague. Are you prepared to answer a blue card from Mr. Coburn? Yes, Mr. Coburn, please.
Well, the EU's interference in the Ukraine was close to causing war. I don't see why it would do any good for this body to interfere in the arrangements that are already being made by major states. This business in Palestine and Israel has been going on for the best part of 2,000 years, and if the Roman Empire and Pontius Pilate couldn't solve it with their rather more rough methods, I don't see how this body can do much better. Why not leave it to the Americans, the British, the French and the Russians and the major powers to settle this as best they can? It does no good the people of this chamber interfering.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure what kind of answer you expect from me on that one. Britain and France are actually member states of the European Union represented here in this very chamber. That's one thing. And the other is that at the end of the day, if already 135 states recognized the state of Palestine and it did not increase the violence, why would the recognition of a few more member states in the European Union do that? I can't understand that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I will admit a maximum of one blue card per speaker. Colleague Morvai had also asked for a blue card, but we cannot, due to time constraints, do more than that. On behalf of the on behalf of the EFDD, we now hear for 3 minutes Fabio Castaldo.
Thank you, President. Palestine. Why should we see this state born? Because it's an act that's due to the Palestinian people, but in the interests of Israel. It's an ethic, historical and political requirement. It's a cornerstone in the wall of peace. But when we talk about recognition and this being subordinated to peace, we need to remind ourselves that we're talking about two very different situations here. Recognition of a state is something that the international community has to do. The process of peace between Israel and Palestine depends on their populations, and we shouldn't confuse the two. This is why the preemptive conclusion of peace would be useful but cannot be a sine qua non. The negotiations must be on a legal equal footing and a political equal footing. Recognition of a state implies the attribution not just of rights but of duties. A genuine state must have a genuine, legitimate democratic government, must guarantee its territory, must disarm sectarian extremist organizations. The Palestinian people cannot succeed in this on their own. It needs our presence, our experience, not just our money. It is we who are their neighbours. If we do not shoulder this very concrete responsibility, we will be disappointing the Palestinians, we will be deceiving the Israelis, and we will be lying to ourselves. After 65 years, we cannot not grasp this opportunity and just turn it into a means of assuaging our consciences. There are two paths open to the Palestinian people. They could, on the one hand, go to the fanatic extremism of the seductive path of the Islamic State, for many people. On the other hand, they could follow the marvellous example of the Republic of Tunisia, which brilliantly has started its painful path to democracy. As a member of our delegation during the legislative and presidential elections there, I can testify to what I saw with my own eyes. I hope, therefore, this Parliament will pay homage to the great efforts and enthusiasm of the Tunisian people. These are the two options that are on the horizon. Remaining with the status quo today is no longer possible. Which of these two models will prevail amongst Palestinian people? That depends partly by the courage we show today, our consistency over the years to come.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Sotirios ZARIANOPOULOS has the floor as a non-attached member.
Certain governments in European countries are currently taking the decision to recognize the Palestinian state. The Greek Communist Party supports the justified right of the Palestinian people to see the Palestinian state being recognized by our own government and by the UN. And we want to put an end to the Israeli occupation and the creation of an independent Palestinian state within the 67 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. We also want the unacceptable wall to be knocked down, the Palestinian prisoners to be released, and we want the settlers to leave as well so that Palestinian people can return to their homes. We would point out that it's a contradiction that countries recognize the Palestinian state, but at the same state they also support and undermine the economic and military policies and continue those with Israel within the framework of the EU and on a bilateral basis. Israel is continuing its attacks against the Palestinian peoples. It's extending its settlements and it's trampling the Palestinian people. We support our full support and solidarity on behalf of the Greek Communist Party for the fair and just struggle of the Palestinian peoples.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you very much, and we will now take further speakers. And now that the representatives of political groups have had the floor, as well as a non-attached member, I would like to point out that we are well behind schedule, and I will be extremely strict about people observing their speaking time. So, Mr. Preda, please set a good example. 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to condemn the terrorist attack on the synagogue in West Jerusalem of last week. And I would like to express my sympathy to the victims and their families. The recognition of the state of Palestine has only come back recently on the agenda of member states again, either because of either in the UK with the adoption of a motion for a resolution, or in Spain, and possibly in the near future in France. And of course the debate has been triggered by the measure taken by Sweden. And the European Parliament is divided on this issue. There are partisans of a direct, immediate recognition of the Palestinian state who feel that unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state represents a possibility of restarting the gridlocked peace talks. It would certainly strengthen the position of the Palestinians in the negotiations. I believe that this view is incorrect. I don't think you can preempt the outcome of the negotiations. The aim of the negotiations is to achieve the two-state solution. I think increasing divides in this way and causing antagonism in this way won't help the peace talks. Our aim is the coexistence of two states side by side, Israel and Palestine, but the recognition of these two states can only be the outcome of the peace process. The speaker is interrupted. Next speaker, Mr. Bostinaru, for 2 minutes.
Domnule președinte, doamna vicepreședinte, înalt reprezentant, doresc din start să vă mulțumesc pentru.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice President. I'd like to start by thanking you for your very balanced address, one that the European Parliament has awaited for so long. The Union, I think, has thus far failed in its meeting with history. The members of my group are shocked by the terrorist attacks and the violence which we've recently seen. The S&D group recognises the initiative taken by national parliaments to adopt resolutions on recognition of the Palestinian state, and indeed welcomes such initiatives. In the current highly complicated context, recognition and negotiations regarding the statehood have to run in parallel. A leading leader felt that the common aim of the existence of two states living in peace on an equal footing has to respect international rules. Recognition isn't enough, however. We need a common strategy between the international players, the United States, the EU, and the international community. But this also requires financial and logistical support to ensure that recognition comes about in a future which is not too far in the distance. I believe that we have to support the reopening of negotiations to ensure that the negotiation can be concluded in the near future. It's only with the recognition also of the state of Israel by the Arab states that the legitimate right to existence of the peoples can be recognized. And we need a strategy for this.
Mr. Bas Belder, for 1 minute, please.
Yes,
thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Mogherini, I want to present to you a fundamental problem, if I may. You were talking about a two-state solution, but that doesn't necessarily mean a Palestinian state side by side with a Jewish state. In a recent resolution of the Palestinian Authority on the 30th of September, they call for a right of self-determination for Palestinian people. Nothing wrong with that, but then bear in mind that the Palestinian Authority is denying the same right of self-determination to the Jewish people with relation to the State of Israel. That doesn't help peace. That doesn't help a two-state solution. So my question is this. 5 years I asked Miss Ashton, Baroness Ashton, who didn't reply, but I hope that you will ask the Palestinian people this question. How is this possible? You are asking for something, but you're not giving the same yourself in a reciprocal way. And I have another question about anti-Semitism in Europe.
Pavel TELIČKA from the...
The next speaker is Pavel TELIČKA from ALDE.
President, first of all, I appreciate that you came that early. We were not used to that from your predecessors, so we hope that we will keep that up. You have been informed that we were unable to have a debate today with the draft resolution. In fact, you were asking for input into your considerations, and I'm afraid you are seeing what is the reality, and that is that this House is split. I do appreciate what you have said, and that is that while you don't have sufficient competencies in this respect, you do see this as your business. And I also appreciate that you have said that there should be an attempt for a common approach in this respect. And I think that, as any other area in the European Union, whenever there is a deadlock in the Council, deadlock in the Parliament, I think the Commission, in this case the Vice President and the High Representative, has a unique opportunity to provide leadership. So I think this is what we would be looking for. You have spoken of a draft or an input to a common approach. I think we would very much welcome if you would come in the very near future with somewhat more detailed elements of this possible common approach. We would definitely be happy to debate it, and I'm sure that that common approach can be based on what you have said. There will be no peace without a Palestinian state. There will be no Palestinian state without security for Israel. So I had more points to say today, but you have preempted a little bit my basket. You have taken them out of my mouth, which is positive. Please take this as a warm invitation to come with the draft, and I'm sure that that might also facilitate the debate in the European Parliament. I hope that in December, last sentence, in December we will manage to come with a draft resolution that colleagues from other groups will consider the draft that was on the table.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker for a minute and a half, Neoklis SYLIKIOTIS.
Colleagues, the decision being taken by increasing numbers of countries to recognize the Palestinian state is sending a positive message to support peace and the struggle of the Palestinian people against occupation. Unfortunately, however, certain groups in the European Parliament have voted against the idea of a resolution on recognizing the Palestinian state. And we would like to see a sustainable Palestinian state on an independent basis being established within the 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The people will take the decisions themselves, and the state would enjoy peace and security alongside Israel. The situation in the region is becoming increasingly dangerous. The Oslo Agreement from '93 unfortunately has been left hanging because of the aggressiveness of Israel and the expansion of its settlements. I think that we have really to look back to see why there is this conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, because the occupation after the Israeli war, which continues, is one of the main causes of this. The settlers are increasing as well, and fundamental human rights are being trampled underfoot. Also, there's still an Israeli presence, and there's a situation with the Gaza Strip as well. The GUI group will continue to support the efforts for recognition of the Palestinian state, but we will call on the European Parliament also to show solidarity to the Palestinian state in this struggle to achieve its independence and peace there as well. Thank you.
Tak, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. The situation in Israel and Palestine is getting worse on a daily basis. And now, nobody believes that the Israeli government wants peace. Instead, they're calling on legislation which is almost apartheid. Plus, we're also seeing more settlements going up, even in eastern Jerusalem. And in the US and the EU, up until now, we haven't tried to put a halt to this dangerous trend. And Gaza Strip is becoming a war zone, not just, as is East Jerusalem, not just because of what is happening on a daily basis, but also what's happening at their religious sites. We need to act urgently. We have to listen to the Israelis and Palestinians who are here in Strasbourg today. They call on us to recognize Palestine. This recognition of Palestine would provide hope to the Palestinian people and could avoid desperate violence. Recognition, therefore, is an absolutely vital condition for negotiations between Israel and Palestine to actually happen on an equal footing and for them to actually happen. Recognition should happen now. Setting conditions on the negotiations is giving Israel a right of veto, which would be not only stupid but highly immoral, and would be putting conditions on those being occupied rather than the occupiers. But where else in the world is the European Union so unjust? Nowhere else, I hope. So let us ensure that we respect human rights and international law. That's something that should happen everywhere, and in particular in a democracy which Israel is supposed to be. The so-called Friends of Israel of the Conservative Group have managed to delay the vote in the parliament, but they're actually Israel's worst friends. Their most genuine friends are those that help Israel to survive in a dignified fashion and are calling for a two-state solution which will be fair and guarantee Israel's peace with its neighbors, as the indication for Initiative for Peace has highlighted on many occasions.
ZDECHOVSKY. Mr. ZDECHOVSKY, please. There he is.
Paní AUKEN, já bych měl...
Mrs. Auken, I have a very simple question. On what do you base your conviction that the recognition of Palestine could lead to a lasting peace? Thank you for your answer.
The group has not asked for any...
Det er det eneste...
They're abusing the system.
No microphone. No microphone.
If we don't create equal conditions, so it's two equal partners who negotiate, we have no chance to get a real negotiation. I cannot guarantee anything, but I can guarantee you that if you don't recognize Palestine and give them the chance to act as a real partner, then there will be no true negotiations, as we have seen from Israel not delivering up till now.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Marcel de GRAAFF for 1.5 minutes.
Microphone, please.
Onschuldige binnen de burgers.
Attack on innocent praying citizens in a synagogue in Jerusalem.
Okay. Het meedogenloos.
Shows the pitiless, violent character of the terrorist regime of the Palestinian Authority. There is no difference between the Palestinian state and the IS, the Islamic Caliphate. There is no struggle for freedom on the part of Palestinians. There is just violence being exercised by Fatah and Hamas in the name of a barbaric ideology. Anyone who recognizes the Palestinian state legitimizes terrorism, legitimizes anti-Semitism, and legitimizes crimes against humanity. Whoever thinks that recognizing the Palestinian state will bring peace closer to the Middle East is blind. This recognition will be celebrated by Hamas and Fatah as a recognition of their claim to the entire country, as a recognition of their anti-Semitic goal of murdering every last Jew in Israel. Whoever recognizes a Palestinian state is unmasking themselves as an anti-Semite. I call on the European Commission to stop all financial assistance from the EU to the Palestinian Authority, to condemn a recognition of the Palestinian state, and to fully recognize the right of the Jewish people to pray on Temple Mount.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Fulvio Martusciello for 2 minutes.
Eyal Ifrah, Gilad Shaar, Naftali Frankel, Mohammad Hussein, 4 ragazzi strappati.
These are 4 men that lost their lives in a religious attack, which means that the two sides no longer talk to each other. It would seem that there should be time for a change in mindset whereby the two sides would come closer. And the only path to peace is accepting the other as your neighbour, even if you don't like them very much. And that is absolutely vital. Against that backdrop, and in current times, we have now received unexpectedly a proposal without debate, and we have been called upon unexpectedly to debate a motion to recognise the state of Palestine, a motion which doesn't actually help the peace process, because we're running the risk of developing an open debate, but where we in fact don't necessarily recognise that both Israel and Palestine have rights and duties, and unexpectedly we have been called on to debate this, although some heads of group wanted us to delay this. Maybe it would have been better to delay it further, to have the final vote on this issue when we're fully aware of the concrete results of what is happening and what recognition of the state means. A recognition of rights, but primarily recognition of duties, and the European Parliament should take all the time that it needs. Each MEP should inform himself, should become informed. I am very glad that Ms. Mogherini has taken this issue in hand. I think that we should be, in fact, debating this issue, but we have no need to rush through this. We should be taking the necessary time for debate.
Die Kollegin Marita ULVSKOG.
Thank you. Marita ULVSKOG for a minute and a half, please.
Tack så mycket, herr talman. Som svensk är ju...
President, thank you. As a Swede, I'm proud that my government has recognized the state of Palestine. But Sweden is only one link in a very long chain which must become increasingly stronger and longer. With EU recognition of the state of Palestine, we would genuinely be opening a window which is opening before our very eyes. This recognition would contribute to the possibility of Israel and Palestine living peacefully alongside each other. A two-state solution has to be encouraged, but to achieve that, the two partners within the negotiations have to be less unequal. The conditions of international law for recognition are there. They've been met, and a viable Palestine as a state, but Israeli occupation infringes the principles of international law. The EU member states in 2009 expressed their will to recognize the state of Palestine as soon as that was possible. That recognition is, however, possible today as it was yesterday, and should happen as quickly as possible. This is a very difficult context being faced in the region with a broad-ranging conflict, and it's therefore crucial that we take a decision on recognition of Palestine.
Are you prepared to accept a question from Lars ADAKTUSSON?
Yes? Are you prepared to answer a blue card question? Absolutely.
Herr talman, jag vill fråga Marita ULVSKOG mot bakgrund av...
Thank you, President. Yes, I have a question of Mrs. ULVSKOG. The Parliament, as an institution, has always said that it's important to speak with a single voice. We need a common, joint, single position on foreign policy. So my question to Mrs. ULVSKOG is the following. Do the Swedish socialists support this position? Is it correct to work in a unilateral way?
Question, not to make a speech and then ask a question. Please stick to that. Thank you. Madam Ulvskog.
Jag är tacksam över att talmannen instruerar herr ADAKTUSSON.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I'd like to thank my colleague. Yes, it's true that each country, each member state, determines its wish to recognize or not. But a position that we could be adopted by the Parliament, if we show that we are united, that could be a message for Palestine, for Israel, for our High Representative as well, who said very clearly exactly where she stands on this, and I place my full trust in her.
Thank you. The next speaker for 1 minute is Mark de Mesmaker. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Madam Vice President, you said that there's a lack of prospects. There is frustration because of the reluctance of states to address this unilateral recognition. There's a debate on this in our own country. Clearly, the right of self-determination for peoples applies to Palestine as well. That is an important principle for my party and for me as a Fleming myself. But of course the only way to achieve this is through politics and diplomacy. Recognition without a negotiated peace accord will not help achieve a balanced solution that guarantees the security of both Israeli and Palestinian citizens. You said that the EU could be an important political actor to bring people back to the negotiating table, that you want to do more than be just a donor but a real actor for political and humanitarian reasons. I urge you to do so.
Pour une minute et demie.
Thank you very much, President, and also very grateful to the Vice President as well for your preliminary remarks. Rather a change in tone from what we're used to. Of course, there are differences of opinion here which are well known. Nevertheless, I think that in reality there is a lot of common ground between us, namely that the status quo is not an option, and there seems to be a deadlock now with regard to negotiations, and frustration on all sides has led to a hardening of positions. Declaration of the Jewish nature of the state is counterproductive, but as always we're seeing the outbreaks of violence and attacks in the city of Jerusalem. So I think that we all agree on that score, but we have to be aware of the fact there's the timing that is important here. I don't accept it. We should not have any kind of one-sided unconditional recognition, because the Palestinians will have to make compromises in due course, but the governments of two entities, and one is governed by a recognized terrorist organization. So how are we going to recognize that entity if we today confer a particular status on those who themselves refuse to recognize the state of Israel? So I don't think there's any alternative. Our role, after all, is to get partners for peace sitting down around the table and not to take decisions which would be hostage to fortune in future. Thank you very much, Ms. Rees. The next speaker is Patrick Liaric for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam High Representative. Thank you very much for what you've just said and the courage you've just sown. Recognizing the Palestinian state would be a strong act. It would be an act in favor of peace and justice. Israel has its state and its security has to be guaranteed, obviously. But what we need is a state for the Palestinian people. And there are deadlocks after the Oslo process, and so there's a need now for us to lean on international law. After a resolution 242 in November 97, they recognized the state of Palestinian with East Jerusalem as its capital. And the 8th of January 2009 resolution recognizes that. But it's only the Israelis that don't recognize that. The PLO, the Palestinian Authority, have recognized the Israeli state. And if it is recognized by the UN, it will be set on equal footing, and the European Union and the EU and the Arab League should be involved. We should produce this act and vote the resolution and be on the side of 137 states that have already recognized the Palestinian state. It's also in the interest of the Israeli people, the citizens movement, the women's movement are demanding the state, and so we have to take our role for peace and security in the Middle East.
Thank you very much. Are you prepared to answer a blue card question, Mr. Svoboda?
Thank you, Chair. My question is as follows. When Mr. Jurek talked about contributing to peace by recognizing the Palestinian state, is he convinced that this recognition would stop the rockets that are being fired from civilian buildings towards Israel, that it would stop building terrorist tunnels, smuggling tunnels, and so on?
Écoutez, chers collègues.
Colleague. It's always the same questions. It's always Manichaean, black and white. I'm against what you've just talked about, but those people who are dealing with this are the Palestinians. The people from whom water, land is being taken are the Palestinians. Those who are getting the most sophisticated weapons are the Palestinians. And so we should stop continuing to try to find pretexts not to make headway in the area of peace. What I'm proposing here is that we together take a political initiative that is simple and sincere and which is in line with what the High Representative said, i.e. recognize the state finally.
Next speaker is Madam Bodil VALERO for 1 minute.
Herr talman och fru kommissionär. Jag är också stolt över att Sverige erkänt Palestina och att det
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased that Sweden has recognized the Palestinian state, and that is now having a ripple effect. I think that we are moving towards a two-state solution. We hope to get that before it's too late. We need to put some pressure to bear on the Israeli state. The state of Israel is not just its government. There is also the opposition, which is asking for the recognition of the Palestinian state, and this is something that has been supported by previous ambassadors and other experts in the area. We need to listen to what they have to say. When we I would like for you to travel to Palestine or Israel and perhaps visit Breaking the Silence. There you can talk to Israeli soldiers who know what the situation is.
Next speaker is Udo VOIGT, non-attached. 1.5 minutes. Yes, thank you, President. Ms. Mogherini, Madam Commissioner, I was very pleased about the encouraging words following your visit to Palestine, because it's time that we broke with our one-sided pro-Israeli policy, which in all these years has not led to peace. 195 UN states opened the door to recognition of Palestinian statehood at UN level. Spain and the UK and Sweden and Ireland and other countries have clearly now taken a position whereby we should attempt to overcome the status quo, and Belgium and others are likely to follow in their wake, because it's time now that the community of nations in Europe try and point the way ahead to a fresh approach, because the Palestinian people has had to contend with occupation as well as destruction of their infrastructure, being hounded from their territory, and had to pay a high price in terms of blood. And you, ladies and gentlemen, in adopting the resolution in December, will decide whether the violations of international law by the State of Israel will continue to be tolerated, or whether your vote will pave the way to the recognition of the State of Palestine. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Francisco Mianmon.
Thank you, President. This debate, as with other similar debates that are taking place in different parliaments in different member states at present, seems to indicate that there's some degree of impatience and concern at the hold-up with the blockages across the borders. There have been many attempts at mediation. The latest was a highly intensive one by Secretary Kerry. There's still violence and conflict, for instance what happened in Gaza this summer, and there are also terrorist attacks such as the one last week in the synagogue in Jerusalem. So it's been a long, violent period, and now there's a lot of worry and concern, and no solution appears to be in sight. So a genuine peace process needs to be taken forward. There needs to be genuine commitment from stakeholders. We shouldn't have unilateral acts such as settlements opposed by the international community. We need to have a two-state solution living together in peace, security and prosperity. Here, as in other parliaments, including the Spanish Parliament, we're talking about recognition of Palestine. What I would like to see in relation to this matter in this forum is more rigorous European cooperation, showing that we genuinely have a European foreign policy. There shouldn't be a rerun of what happened in UNESCO. It's not our role to recognize states in this House, President, but what we can do is say that it is urgent for serious peace talks to take place, and that the EU can provide support for that. So I support Ms. Mogherini, and I hope there will be adequate coordination between the key member states. It's a very difficult period for the region. There's a major challenge from ISIS in Syria and Iraq. We need frank, solid, genuine talks between Israelis and Palestinians to create a space for dialogue, and I conclude, so that there's hope for peace in the whole of the Middle East, because at the moment they're getting subsumed into a climate of frustration.
Gilles PARGNEAUX.
Madam High Representative, first of all, I would like to echo what you said as an introduction. You talked about some of the most important points that should be included in the resolution. You talked about highlighting the important role of the European Union, i.e. being a major player of choice in the region. So we're going to have to clearly put our resolve to recognize the Palestinian state on the table, so that we can help the coexistence of these two nations, Palestine and Israel. And then, of course, we will have to talk about territorial limits, colonialization, the Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, capital of both states. We are not alone in this resolve and in this quest for peace. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., the Arab League, as you indicated as well, and obviously are on board, and we have to ask the UN Security Council to make sure that they give impetus to this resolve. Now, there are some areas where symbolism is more important than others. This is our political duty, is to bring peace to the Middle East and to have the coexistence of these two states. I would just recall Mahmoud Abbas when he said there is not one state too much in the Middle East. There's one state too few.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jan Sotirios for 1 minute.
Well, first and foremost, I have to say, the very fact that it is being debated in the European Parliament, unfortunately the European Parliament is again interfering into things which are none of its business. Every state should have the right to set its own line according to its own national interest, and the Parliament shouldn't recommend any solutions. It exceeds its own powers and it will only complicate the situation. Now, regarding the topic as such, part of the Palestinian representation opts for violence and terrorism, and it doesn't conceal that it wants to destroy Israel. That's simply unacceptable, and I want to hear here that we will not support these people, we will not give them any financial means, and we will not incite them, not do any means to give them false hopes. That is more important, and that should be a part of this debate.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ivo VAJGL.
Distinguished Chairman, High Representative, first of all, I would like to thank you for your very frank, open and a very lucid appearance here in the Parliament. I think you were quite self-confident. I hope you remain like that throughout your mandate and term of office. I agree with you in saying that we should support the peace initiative of the Arab countries. I think that we will have to return to this document. This should be one of our basic points to be taken into account if we want to find a solution. Yesterday we have debated in the Parliament whether we should recognize the Palestinian state or not. But I think that politicians lag behind citizens. Citizens wish a fast developing peace process in the Middle East. They want to find a lasting solution for Israel and for Arab neighbors. The status quo is unacceptable. It only leads to the escalation of violence. It only strengthens the vanity of the Israeli government. The recognition of the Palestinian statehood is not the best or optimum solution at this point of time, but it will help deblock the process. If the Israelis and Palestinians wanted to, then I think this initiative will lead to a positive solution. On Friday, the Slovenian Parliament will also debate the recognition of Palestine statehood. I personally can say that I am very optimistic in that respect. I think that Slovenia will follow the path that it has set for itself. Thank you.
The next speaker is going to be Marisa Matias.
Obrigada.
Thank you. Ms. Mogherini, I'd like to start by thanking you for coming and making this proposal. I think you have to make a clear and simple proposal if you want people to understand it, and I think that's what you've done. It's a clear proposal, two-state solution, borders of 1967, Jerusalem as a capital. I know that there will be some discussion, but I'd like to thank you for making this proposal. Recognizing a state requires other criteria too. We don't recognize occupied territories, and we can't carry on turning a blind eye to the existence of occupied territories. Self-determination is also important. We shouldn't sell arms to the oppressor. We need to work on all of these aspects. I applaud your initiative, Ms. Mogherini, but I fear that we may end up just being patronizing, as in the past, and two-faced.
For 1 minute now, Alyn Smith, please.
President, thank you, High Representative. I'd add my own congratulations to your very lucid opening remarks. This century-old tragedy has its roots in empire. My own country, Scotland, and indeed the UK, has a bounden moral duty of obligation to the peoples of this region. Statehood has long been promised. This is not a new discussion. Right the way back to the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Balfour, a Scotsman, contemplated two states. The UK's own White Paper of 1939 said, and I quote, "The objective of His Majesty's government is the establishment within 10 years of an independent Palestine state." And in Scotland today we support recognition, government and parliament, alongside many other countries. And to those that say that negotiations with Israel should not be circumvented, now is not the right time, I say no, enough. That line has been used, and it is a line, has been used to give Israel a veto over the whole process for too long. We need to change tack, colleagues. There is no peace process worth the name, and Israel's policies account for the lion's share of that failure, alongside our own hypocrisy and inaction. We must recognise Palestine urgently.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Bruno GOLLNISCH for 1 minute and a half. Not admitted. Bruno GOLLNISCH, please.
Could we reset the time, please? Yes, we'll do that, of course, Mr. GOLLNISCH. Yes, thank you very much, President. In international law, a state is a population, a territory, a government, and the legal recognition that states this and enshrines this. Now, in terms of the recognition of a state for the Palestinian people, some of my colleagues have declared that we could envisage bringing Palestinian back to Jordan, but you know, there of course there are all the problems with the West Bank. Should we just be satisfied with the status quo? Some people say that the recognition of the Palestinian state will not bring us peace, and that's quite obvious. But is maintaining the status quo going to give us peace? I've heard from people from the Czech Republic, Poland, countries that have been occupied by others and have suffered very much and have had to struggle to have their sovereignty recognized, but have a problem when it deals with the Palestinian people and that recognition. Now, it's quite obvious that the terrorists are feeding on despair. Now, the recognition of well, you know, there was the recognition in 1993, and Hamas is now being led by Mr. Abbas, and I'm afraid that it might be too late, because if Israel doesn't negotiate now, if it doesn't want to negotiate with Palestine, they say that they can't negotiate with Hamas.
Thank you very much. Speaker for 2 minutes, Michèle ALLIOT-MARIE. President, Madam High Representative, I think that we ought to bear two things in mind. The first is that for decades the conflict between Israel and Palestine has been used as a pretext for terrorism and for fundamentalists, and the truth is that the prime victims on both sides are civilians. Now, you have reminded us there should be a two-state solution, 1967 borders, with Jerusalem being the capital of both states and security guarantees for Israel. And that is why we have to take action today. There's a window of opportunity, but that window of opportunity closes a little bit more with every fresh outbreak of violence. Now, my personal experience and contact that I've had with the leaders of both peoples suggests to me that, in principle, a solution is possible, and that the major hurdle is one of mutual trust, or better said, a lack of trust between the two peoples. I believe that, in this regard, the international community, and Europe in particular, have a role to play. European Parliament has no powers as such to recognize a state. Nevertheless, we must now take action. You must react, and we're counting on you to do just that. So, Ms. Mogherini, precisely which steps do you plan to take, and when? What measures will you ask of the Israeli and Palestinian representatives, as well as representatives of the other Arab countries with which you've been in contact? Because one of the keys to a solution is to ensure that any commitments entered into are observed.
For 1 minute, Elena
Thank you, President. Thank you, Ms. Mogherini, for your work and your dedication. I'm delighted to note that in Spain there was a quasi-unanimous vote to recognize the state of Palestine. I'm sure you will have heard on many occasions and indeed said yourselves that Europe is moving slowly, Europe is not standing on the world stage as a major actor. We're late to the party, and we're late to the party of finding a decent, fair solution to this too. There's an occupier here, and there's an occupied land. The occupier has responsibilities for security if it is occupying territory. So I agree with the broad idea that we need consensus. Yes, we do need consensus, but we shouldn't use the need for consensus as an excuse for not acting. We need to show our faces and do something. Palestine already is a state. Palestine has territory, government, parliament. Palestine is a state. It's about time we all recognized it as such.
Yes, the next speaker is Zdzisław KRASNODY for 1 minute, please.
Mr. Chairman, I am an MEP from a country that was a homeland to many Jews. Warsaw is my constituency, and Warsaw was home to the largest number of Jews before the war. And unfortunately, this coexistence, peaceful coexistence, was ended by the Nazis. Poland is now a huge cemetery of the Jewish people. That is why the security of the Jewish nation is extremely important to us. I think an early or premature recognition of the Palestinian state may harm our relationship with the Israelis. However, we should focus on dialogue. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank
bin dafür ausgesprochen dankbar.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I'm grateful to you for sticking to your speaking time. Next speaker, Sofia SAKORAFA, for 1 minute.
Κυρία Μογκερίνη, η άτολμη και υπονομευτική πολιτική της Ευρωπαϊκής.
Ms. Mogherini, the European Union's policy has culminated in tragic events in Gaza, and the Union is continuing along the same road, and recognition of a Palestinian state would create new commitments for the European Union, particularly when we're talking about negotiations between Israel and Palestine. We know that we're talking about negotiations between an occupier and an occupied state, so between an occupier and a liberation movement, and we would be granting certain prerogatives to the Palestinian state. They would be able to lodge complaints in respect of human rights violations. For many years we have undermined peace in the region as a result of our attitude, so let's not start backtracking now.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Karima DELLI for 1 minute.
Colleagues, Monday evening you decided to postpone the resolution vote to recognize the Palestinian state. Is that really serious? Is it time to hesitate when every day that passes could bring us closer to a Palestinian state? What are you afraid of? I was at the UN a week ago to talk about how we are aware that recognizing the Palestinian state is very important in terms of peace. It's one of the first steps. And the Parliament does have a role to play to create impetus for a dialogue. 135 member states, Ireland, Sweden, Spain, maybe tomorrow France. But what about us? Palestine and Israel need our support. We need to show that we're able to break through the walls. The two-state solution is dragging its feet. We need to recognize that we don't have a one state too many in the Middle East, but one too few. We should show that through our political resolve we can have lasting peace.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, non-attached colleague, Mr. SYNADINOS.
President, the UN General Assembly took a decision in 2012 to recognize non-member observer status of the state of Palestine. Now, Palestine has become a state, and we've taken the steps towards full recognition. But we've seen an increase in aggression from Israel in the last 2 years, more attacks, more victims, more Palestinian territory occupied and colonized. There is no doubt that the Palestinians are in the right here. They are struggling to have their own homeland, faced with the fact that most of it is occupied. Most of them have been trying to find a solution for some time to bring this situation to an end, to reduce the aggression. But it continues, and Palestinians continue to want to have their own state. 35 countries have already called for this, and following years of talk after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, what has happened in relation to Israel's behavior in the Gaza Strip and West Bank? It's a people that just wants to have its own land. History is repeating, not exactly, literally, but more or less, and we need mutual respect.
Panie pośle, kontynuujemy debatę. Do zabrania głosu zapraszam pana posła.
Now, MEP Francesca Gambas from EPP. 2 minutes.
Sí, muchas gracias, president, vicepresidenta Mogherini. Quiero añadirme a los agradecimientos.
I would like to join in the words of thanks for your general approach, Ms. Mogherini, and I would also like to endorse the mood in which you've come here, the tone of what you've been saying. I think you were correct in your comments, as reiterated by others, that it is not the role of this Parliament to recognise states. It does not have the power to do so, but I would like to quote the Mayor of Barcelona. It is very important for someone with political responsibility to know what powers he has and does not have. And the Middle East is within our area of competence. Many people here have said we should let states do their own thing and the EU should not get involved. Well, states have been failing to manage conflict in member states for centuries. What else is the EU waiting for to come in and try to help people find peace when states have failed to do so? Recognising Palestine as a state in under international law is not something that could ever be perceived as having happened contrary to the will of Israel. I will always defend Israel against those who deny its right to existence. Following so many years of conflict in the Middle East, the only possible option is a negotiated coexistence in peace of 2 states, Israel and Palestine. I am convinced that such a coexistence is possible, but such an end result will only be possible if there is negotiation and dialogue. If we accept that we should no longer let the past overshadow the present, but rather we should be looking to the future. Thank you.
Gracias. Adesso onorevole Pier Antonio Panzeri.
Now call Pier Antonio Panzeri for 1 minute.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mogherini, I should like to thank you for the visit you paid to the Middle East right at the beginning of your term of office, precisely to try and find a solution to a problem in an area in which there are so many problems. And you said yourself, it's by no means easy, and the problem here is not simply to do with the recognition of Palestinian statehood, rather it's how it should come into being. But we believe that we can now proceed towards peace. But time is running out, and I believe that the parties realize this, but recently we have seen both Israeli and Palestinian extremism, which is really closing down any space for dialogue, whereas we need to see a resumption of a negotiation. So what can we do to bring that about? Now, above and beyond diplomatic action, I truly believe that we should avail ourselves of all the instruments at our disposal, economic, financial and political tools, because we are the main donor to the Palestinian Authority, and we are also a major market for Israel and for its exports, and we should use those two levers to bring the necessary pressure to bear on both sides to force them back to the negotiating table. Thank you.
Now, I'm sorry. Grazie, onorevole. Now, Mr. Syed Karim, European Conservative Reformist, please. 1 minute.
Madam Vice President, correctly observed, when Europe does not anchor itself firmly to its values, it sets itself adrift. We have much of which to be proud in our history. But the burned scars on children in Gaza have left a permanent imprint on the minds of our citizens and are now permanently etched on our humanity. Far too many of our governments have been caught off guard and out of step with public opinion, rushing to provide denials as Europeans watched the horrors inflicted on innocents unfolding second by second, their suffering and hopelessness capturing the European conscience, leading for calls of never again. Today our parliaments are reflecting that public mood, one after another lining up to state clearly that the time has come to give the Palestinians a state and a homeland in order to protect them. And there should be no parliament from where that call should be louder or clearer than the European Parliament. You quite clearly have recognised the urgency of us to deal with this, but yet illegal settlements continue as we sit here debating. A failure to do all in our power to end such horrors that it should never happen again is to unanchor Europe and set ourselves adrift from our values and our humanity. Madam, be innovative and this Parliament will be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Procedura niebieskiej karty.
Now, blue card, Mr. Verike. Over to you.
Czy pan się zgadza?
Do you accept the blue card? Mr. Karim, do you accept the blue card?
Herr Karim, wir reden hier immer von...
Mr. Karim, here we're always talking about Israel and the Gaza Strip as well as the West Bank. It's always the Israelis who are apparently responsible for things, whereas the Palestinians are threatened with destruction. I mean, what do you think of the relationship between the Palestinians and the Arabs? Because as far as I'm aware, all Arab states have announced their support for the Palestinians. Ever since at the beginning of the 1990s, Yasser Arafat came out in support of Saddam Hussein. So why don't we turn to the friends of the Palestinians before we then start talking about creating this state?
Mr. Karim, please.
Mr. President, in my remarks I very clearly referred to the innocents. There are innocents on all sides, and the fact that we are seeing young children being subjected to the sorts of horrors which are completely unimaginable ought to awaken the humanity in all of us. That is where Europe must once again pin its values and pin the hopes of the citizens of Europe who today want us to come forward with a positive, momentous action programme. And that is something to which I believe our High Representative today was indicating, and for that you will have our support.
Thank you very much indeed. Pani poseł Teresa
Rodriguez Rubio, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. I don't support this type of distance in this debate. Desmond Tutu said, if you're neutral in face of injustice, then you've chosen the side of the oppressor. People have said, why should the EU get involved in areas that are not part of their remit? Perhaps the EU doesn't get involved when there is a preferred trade agreement with Israel, ignoring the human rights conditions in those agreements. What about when we sell arms to Israel? As part of the international community, the European Union shouldn't it demand all of the resolutions of the EU, if the UN in the territory be complied with? For example, the refugees, 244 on the occupied territory withdrawal, and the recognition of the Israeli state. I mean, the situation couldn't be worse, and this is because of the complicity of the EU. Barroso got an award because of this complicity at the University of Jerusalem.
Gracias. Onorevole Gianluca Buonanno.
Grazie. Thank you, President. When I was a child, people have been talking about Palestine already for some time, and I thought it would all be sorted out soon. Now, I'm an MEP, and it's still on the table. People are still talking about Palestine and Israel. We speak a lot, we give everyone else lessons, don't we? But we're not capable of solving this kind of problem. Shouldn't we practice what we preach? An Israel-Palestine agreement cannot be unilateral. It has to be bilateral. It has to be between Palestinians and Israelis, because otherwise you will just have a situation where you're giving something to Palestine which is really giving Hamas a prize. They're terrorists, almost like Nazis. The Palestinians had Arafat money. Where did that money come from? What happened to it? Why didn't they help their own people with that money?
Grazie, onorevole. A teraz pan poseł.
And now Mr. ADAKTUSSON of the EPP, please.
2 minuty, przepraszam.
For 2 minutes.
Tack, herr talman.
Thank you very much, President. When we hear about following the Swedish state in recognizing the state of Palestine, I would have to recognize this type of unconditional support is, well, this is something that is that flies in the face of the idea of bilateral discussions, which I feel are the best way to forward. And what about the involvement of the population at this point in time? There's really de facto no Palestinian state. And there is the Montevideo Convention, the conditions of which are not being complied with. The state has to control its own area, and they have to solve the problems with the border. That's one of the conditions, and that's not something that is happening to date. And so recognizing the state is really just a gesture, but here in the Parliament, we should try to step away from irresponsibility and populism, as has been shown by the Swedish government. People are trying to overlook the fact that Hamas basically controls the Palestinian state, and they want the state of Israel to be annihilated. And the situation in the area requires a political responsibility, and we need to act as a community. We need to have a peaceful development based on democracy and the rule of law.
Procedura niebieski.
There's a blue card for you. Mrs. Auken.
Would you accept blue card, please?
Accept procedure blue card.
Yes.
Pani Auken, bardzo proszę.
Well, I would just like to ask my Swedish colleague if he does not know the fact that, for example, the UN already at the end of the 40s said that there should be Palestine, and we have talked about Palestine and this being in line with justice and law, and we have conditions for those occupied rather than giving powers to the occupiers.
Proszę bardzo.
Folkrätten är entydig när det gäller de krav.
Well, there are conditions that have to be met for the recognition of the state, and the right of the people is something that has not been complied with, and it doesn't mean that we are not going to recognize Palestine, but I think that we need to have that recognition only after the negotiation with both parts.
Arena, une minute, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, President. Well, first of all, I should like to thank the High Representative for the priority which he has given to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict right from the outset. And I would like to thank all of those states who already embarked on the process of recognizing Palestinian statehood. Now, recognition is not a reward. Quite simply, it is a right. Recognition of a Palestinian state is not something to be negotiated with an occupier. Recognition of Palestinian statehood is, from our perspective, a guarantee that there will be a resumption of dialogue which to date has failed. We have to push for the two-state solution, which has been the one put forward by the Union up until now, and a fair approach to both parties, but there will be a requirement for the Palestinian authorities now to show more responsibility. The EU has to play its role, and the Parliament ought to support you in what you are doing, Madam, and that's what we are doing here today in this Parliament. And I salute hundreds of Israeli patriots who have signed a resolution calling for a Palestinian state. Recognition is the best solution to guarantee the state of Israel. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Députée. Procedura niebieskiej karty.
There's a blue card for you. Do you accept?
You accept the blue card?
Bill Etheridge, do you accept the blue card? Do you accept blue card? There is a blue card for you.
No, I think we've had enough debate here.
Dziękuję. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much.
Now, Marcus Pretzel for 1 minute.
Herr Präsident,
President, ladies and gentlemen. Precisely which Palestinian state are we supposed to be recognizing? The Hamas state in Gaza or the Fatah state in the West Bank? Now, I can well sympathize with a desire to have a Palestinian state, but have to be appropriate preparations made for such a state. And the question we really have to ask ourselves is whether taking such a step will lead to peace in the Middle East, or will we in actual fact be paving the way for more violence, because the objective of Hamas is to destroy Israel. In future, then, would you be wanting to legalize Hamas, and it could then pursue its objectives with the support of the European Union? It is important that we make it clear that human rights must be respected, as must minority rights, and also make it clear that any Palestinian state would need to be a state governed by the rule of law. And as long as we haven't answered those questions, as long as we don't have any such guarantees that we would have a law-based state, then I can really not countenance approval of a Palestinian state.
Mr. Michel Vegas. Oh, sorry. There's a blue card for you. Do you accept?
Excuse me. Mr. Pretzel? Czy akceptuje pan procedurę niebieską?
Do you accept the blue card? There's a blue card for you.
Proszę.
To hear all these people talking about Israel as a rule of law state. Would you please tell me what does Israel have to do with the rule of law when every now and then they keep killing innocent civilians, including children? What do they have to do with the rule of law when they rob other people's land in violation of all the United Nations and other international law regulations? They keep building settlements. They have summary killing and summary demolition of people's homes. What does it have to do with the rule of law? Sir, would you please tell me what do you mean by the rule of law, and why do you support Israel, this state of child killers and land robbers? Thank
Eine Minute bitte.
Frau Kollegin.
Well, madam, there are two options here. Either you didn't listen carefully, or it really was a terrible translation. I did not say that Israel was governed by the rule of law, although in actual fact it is, but that is a different matter altogether. It's not actually something that I said in my speech. I think that this Parliament ought to be paying attention to rather different things that really are its responsibility, and that is not supporting terrorism in either Israel or Palestine. That's what the Parliament should be doing, and I was talking about a Palestinian state, if it gained recognition, being a state governed by the rule of law, and we have to guarantee that ahead of time. That's what I was talking about in respect of the rule of law.
Pan poseł Michel Viegas z grupy GUE.
Mr. Viegas, GUE. 1 minute.
Recognizing the state of Palestine is basic justice. It's taken many decades of suffering by the people of Palestine to get there. Recognition of the state of Palestine based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as a capital in accordance with the UN resolutions is the best way to relaunch the peace process. The two-state solution is something that needs to be fleshed out and created. There are many stakeholders in Israel, many actors who agree with this vision. We need to ensure that the EU uses all its political and economic power to make a contribution to ensuring that all states who have not yet recognized Palestine do so, and that the basic human rights of the people of Palestine are respected.
Obrigado. A teraz poproszę pana posła Gunnara.
Now Mr. Gunnar Hökmark from the EPP. 2 minutes.
Talman, en tvåstatslösning.
Thank you very much, President. A two-state solution is necessary in order to create peace and stability in the Middle East, but a two-state solution should be based on two states. Two states that recognize their right to exist and that recognize their right to borders and that can contribute to the rule of law, human rights, and so forth. If we don't put these conditions on the table, you'll have a unilateral recognition without any types of conditions or requirements, and that means that one country will not be able to defend their country against terror. And if we don't have a human rights, then you can open the door to terrorism. A two-state solution, well, would mean that you have to recognize what is happening in terms of human rights violations and so forth. What we see is a proliferation of violence, rape, terrorism, and this is a conflict that goes way above and beyond the Israeli-Palestine situation. And If we recognize only one part of a state, then it would make it very difficult for that state to function as a state, and that means that it would be impossible to reach a two-state solution that would contribute to peace and democracy. We know that Israel is living under the threat of terror and hate and violence. There's a lot of anti-Semitism, not only from neighbor states but from elsewhere. And what we need to do is make sure that a two-state solution would guarantee safety and freedom for all, and that's why certain demands need to be placed.
Mr. Hochmark. Pani poseł Sakorata.
Mrs. Sakorata, GUE.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε. Θα ήθελα να ρωτήσω τον κύριο συνάδελφο από πότε...
Thank you. I would like to ask a question. Do you think that an occupation can be a factor for peace in the region? And do you think that a resistance movement can really be called terrorism? It's a resistance against occupation by another people.
Mr. Hochmark. Micro.
I can for sure tell my colleague that an occupation must end. But an occupation must end by having achieved peace and the recognition of peaceful cohabitation. But if you accept movements like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the even worse extremes, I can assure you they are not fighting for independent, democratic, sovereign states. They are fighting for a society where people's rights are humiliated. We will not have, I do not want to have a Palestinian state that is in control of those who are today leading Gaza. I want a Palestinian state that can fulfill democratic obligations, that respect everyone and each. That's our duty to secure, and that requires a long-term process.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Afzal Khan, 1 minute.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking the High Representative Mogherini for the hard work that you are putting in to find this solution for this terrible problem in the Middle East. 135 countries, including many European ones, have already recognized Palestine. Recently, Sweden and the parliaments in the UK, Ireland and Spain followed suit. While this is a progress, it is saddening that it took over 2,000 Gazans to die in the latest Israeli attack for Europe to start acting. Every nation deserves to be recognized, and the Palestinians have suffered immensely. It is a huge disappointment that the EU vote has been delayed. Every second wasted costs innocent lives. The greatest threat is the illegal settlements in Palestine, which continue to grow without account. The two-state solution is the only real chance of peace, putting both on equal footing. Israeli citizens believe this too, and an Israeli petition in favor of this is being publicly handed over outside the European Parliament this evening. The EU must have a coordinated approach to ensure peace and security and stability for all. It is time to give the Palestinians some hope. I urge all of us to take the bold step forward and vote to recognize Palestine. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Valina from GUE. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Since 1948, Israel has been violating all UN resolutions, human rights and international law. No European country has questioned its recognition. Recognition of the state of Palestine is a responsibility and a moral obligation for those same countries who encouraged partition in 1948. To do anything else would be to show that Europe is weak and cannot help peace processes. Recognizing Palestine will help future generations recognize that Europe was on the right side in history. Something similar to what happened with apartheid in South Africa. Countries supporting apartheid are now a cause for bad memories. The Sakharov Prize ceremony today has reminded all of us that human dignity should be at the heart of all politics. Recognizing Palestine is a basic proof of a political will to seek peace and to oppose injustice and illegality.
Gracias. Niebieska karta.
There's a blue card for you. Do you accept? Mr. Ulf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam, you mentioned South Africa. Do you not agree with the words of Nelson Mandela, who once said that I cannot conceive of Israel withdrawing or giving up land if Arab states do not recognize Israel within secure borders? And do you not recognize that passing the motions that you want to have in this House will lead to a government of Hamas, a terrorist organisation which does not accept the right of Israel to exist, and therefore there will be no peace?
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. There's one more blue card. Mrs. Sojdrova, do you accept? Over to you.
Děkuji, pane předsedající.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for my colleague. Does she recognize the existence of the Israeli state? And who gives her the right to call it an aggression when Israel actually defends itself against Palestinian attacks?
Bardzo proszę o odpowiedź.
We're awaiting your answer. I'm afraid we're running late, and I'm afraid blue cards are now finished. No more blue cards.
Microphone, please.
Se suele decir que no hay.
People tend to say the blindest person of all is the person who does not wish to see. If you've got one of the biggest armies in the world, if you're attacking your civilians on your territory, destroying houses, expelling people from their own homes and lands, men, women and children, the UN has said that any occupied people has the right to defend itself. Words of the UN, not my own.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Tanya Fanon, 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam Vice President, I listened to you very carefully, and I would like to support you in finding the solution for peace and coexistence in the Middle East. It is high time that we spoke of the recognition of the Palestinian state here in the European Parliament. I know how tricky this issue is, but I know how important wise moves are. In Slovenia, we will be discussing the further steps in recognizing the Palestinian state now. The Social Democrats have already taken this decision. We want 2 states, peaceful states, which will guarantee peace in the region. For decades, we have been witnessing violence and battles, illegal settlements, constant violation of international law and human rights. Every innocent life on either side is an obstacle to a peaceful and lasting solution. I agree, here in the European Parliament we need a common European strong message. I hope, Madam Vice President, that through you and your team we will find 2-state solution and will be able to recognize both. This will be the only guarantee for a peaceful Middle East.
Chwala. Onorevole Barbara Spinelli, 1 minuta.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Why should we be recognizing the state of Palestine? I mean, it's not to try and harm or weaken Israel. Rather, it is to try and give it force. It is not only military, because states simply cannot survive if they occupy territory that is not their own. measures have to be not only legal but also legitimate, and we have therefore to renounce the status quo. And in Europe too, we have to try and overcome these obstacles. And of course, Israel owes its existence to the darkest chapters in Europe's history, and that is why it is important that it be this Parliament that makes this gesture, that goes ahead and recognizes Palestinian statehood. And if we don't make that gesture, then the Israeli government will simply then retrench its position, be on a war footing, and we will have a situation in which territory is being destroyed on the basis of an ethnicity.
Grazie, onorevole Branzo Benifei. Una minuta.
Sì, grazie Presidente.
Thank you, President. I agree with the call from others that we need to find a balanced solution with as much of a consensus as possible in this House. I think that should be based on the political idea of recognition of the state of Palestine. That should be clear. Some Israeli politicians, for instance in the Labour Party, think that it should actually be up to Israel to take the first step, and I think that would be a good thing for the future of Israel. Nonetheless, I think this motion would legitimate the state of Palestine, and that would help the beginning of negotiations with Israel. Our own position should not be seen as something getting in the way of negotiations between Palestine and Israel. Negotiations between Palestine and Israel are the only way out of the conflict, and the EU has a vital role to play there. We can show our own strength and influence thanks to Federica Mogherini in her first few weeks in the job.
Grazie. A teraz pan poseł Lopez Aguilar.
Now, Mr. Lopez Aguilar.
Thank you. High Representative Mogherini, this debate shows the exasperation that we have in the face of the degradation of the situation in the region. And this solution aims to contribute to move towards move the EU towards a recognition of the Palestinian state. But this recognition has to be mutual, because we absolutely need to make sure that this is not one-directional. We have to take on board the sensitivity and the bravery of the Palestinian state in recognizing Israel, because we need to have a sure peace where two democratic states can cohabitate under international law. And so we should provide a stimulus to create the governance structures. It's a population that lives in its territory, but it should try to aim to live in a peaceful way with its neighbor state, i.e. Israel.
Jest Abgeordneter Eugen Freund.
Now, Eugen Freund for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. You can clearly see, Madam High Representative, that this is the most sensitive and most difficult foreign policy issue that the European Parliament has to tackle with. And to tell you the truth, I am ambivalent. I don't know what the right decision is, because one thing is for sure: peace can only be achieved if and when Israel and the Palestinians are ready. For decades now, there has been frustratingly little progress in peace processes, and not because no one tried. We have seen many attempts by outside powers to initiate, to prompt, to cajole the two sides into settling the differences, but to almost no avail. And by the way, it were mainly the United States and not Europe up until now that undertook numerous efforts in the past. The great number of victims on both sides over the past 40 years are a sad testament to the failure of many diplomatic attempts. To recognize the state of Palestine might bring the parties back to the negotiating table, but as I said, we can't force them to make peace. Only they can. Thank you very much.
Danke sehr. Député Vincent Payon.
Mr. Payon, for 1 minute. Mrs. High Representative, thank you very much for your commitment. We've been waiting for this for a long time. Finally, we're dealing with this very difficult issue. You're aiming for peace and a political role for the EU, but we need credibility and we need to bring ourselves together. We shouldn't find ourselves in a situation that you may have encountered when you went to Gaza. If we lose our credibility, if we are united, we will be in a situation where we lose our credibility. In this discussion, it seems like the member states who created the impetus for this, such as Spain, Sweden and France, have the same position. It's not the same. Spain says a negotiation first and then a recognition, and so we need to keep that on mind. 135 states have recognized Palestine, but this hasn't led to peace. We will be supporting you, but we need an initiative that goes above and beyond recognition. It should be the road to peace, which takes into consideration all parties. In this rather hasty initiative, we need to make sure that we don't lose our credibility in this process.
Merci beaucoup. Pan poseł Boris.
Mr. Boris Zala, 1 minute. Socialists and Democrats.
Palestinian people deserve a sovereign state, just as Israel has the right to live in peace. As a friend of Israel, I support the recognition of Palestinian statehood. The move is not meant to undermine Israel's position. On the contrary, its purpose is to rescue the two-state solution, which is the only alternative for Israel's security. Today, after the failure of Kerry's initiative, after violence in Jerusalem, it is time for the EU to assume more responsibility. Recognition of Palestine is a powerful diplomatic tool. We should use it wisely to help restart peace negotiations. Recognition of Palestine in the pre-1967 borders will strengthen all those Israelis and Palestinians who believe in the two-state solution. Mr. Netanyahu may not like to hear it, but I am convinced that recognizing Palestine could be one of the EU's greatest contributions to the Israeli security. Thank you.
Dziękuję, panie pośle. A teraz...
Thank you very much. Now, our last speaker, Mr. Tonino Picula, SND. 1 minute.
Madam High Representative, the recognition of the state of Palestine should be the starting point of a new process. This is understandable. I don't see an independent Palestine as a continuation of a long conflict, but as a search for a new peaceful solution. I speak as a witness of the disintegration of a state in Europe. Until the international community recognized the new states in the Balkans, there was no sign of peace, despite the many negotiations. The new Palestinian state should not be a continuation of terrorism. This should not be allowed.
We need to face really hard choices from time to time. We have to do it for the sake of our own role model perspective in the 21st century. Thank you.
Chwala. Przechodzimy do procedury Catch the Eye.
Now, Catch the Eye. There's quite a lot of people willing to take the floor, so my decision would be that every political group can have one speaker. Now for the EPP, Mr. ZDECHOVSKY.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear Madam Vice President, to start with, I'd like to thank you for coming here to discuss this topic. I do not share the opinions of ostracizing Israel and elevating and praising Palestine. I think we have to see it more in a more complex way. And I just warn against a unilateral step without consulting Israel. Without, I don't want this step to be detrimental to the current very fragile ceasefire between the two sides. I don't want people to continue dying, and I think I want the Holy Lands to see real peace, but the peace has to be made by two sides, and I agree with the view that the EU is not the one who should say that one or the other should be recognized, because if in that situation we might see a referendum in Spain, and we will see other states who might recognize some other state that we don't wish to see.
Dziękuję, panie pośle. Z grupy...
Thank you very much. S&D, Mr. Caputo.
Grazie, Presidente. Il 29 novembre l'ONU
Thank you. On the 29th of November, the UN is celebrating the International Day of Solidarity with Palestine. After a very long wait, the issue of recognition of Palestine is back on the table for European governments. Sweden, Spain, UK, Ireland, France, Denmark and Belgium are now being followed by the EU in recognizing the independent state of Palestine under international law. Two-state solution with mutual recognition so the people of Palestine and Israel can live together in peace and democracy. It's important for the EU to play a role in making a contribution to ensuring that there is economic and humanitarian security for Israelis and Palestinians, assisting with the negotiations, recognizing the state of Palestine in a way that makes a decisive contribution to peace in the Middle East. If the EU really wants to be a player on the world stage, then this is the way to do it. Good luck. Well done on what you've done so far, High Representative, and best of luck with the future.
Now for the ALDE group, Mrs. Bilbao, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. I support the recognition of the Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders. Palestine is the observer of the UN since 2012. This recognition is an act of peace. This is based on negotiations, agreements, and words to substitute for war and weapons and against the unilateral violence of Israel. We now understand the need for peace. Mahmoud Abbas put this forth at the UN Assembly in 2012. He convinced 138 peace countries. Israel did not respond as is customary and did not recognize Palestine, and that's why we see the ensuing violence. We support that the Palestinian people are not the enemy, and thank you very much, Mrs. Mogherini, for all of your efforts.
Gracias. Z grupy GUE.
Now GUE. Mr. Haristi, 1 minute.
La hora de la política.
The PLO spokesperson has said the time has come for politics, and this is the best way to move towards a fair and lasting peace. It is necessary in order to get back on track and ensure that there is a balance of strength and dialogue. We need to look at the reality as a basis for steps forward, and we need to ensure that the people of Palestine are accorded the dignity they deserve. The time has come to recognize the state of Palestine. The time has come because Palestine cannot wait any longer. Peace in the Middle East cannot wait any longer. Thank you.
Gracias. Z grupy
Now the Greens. 1 minute.
Sí, señora Mogherini, muchas gracias por estar aquí y por su actitud, sobre todo.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mogherini, for being here, and thank you very much for your attitude. Recognizing Palestine is just the beginning. We need to make sure that they can take an active role in terms of, they've been at a deadlock for many years. It's not just about, we need to look at this in terms of reopening the borders, avoiding the resettlement of old settlements, and then we need to sanction any violations of UN resolutions, and we need to limit at least control arms traffic, and then we need to be there. We need to be on the ground. We need to send an EP delegation there to Gaza, and we need to adopt an attitude vis-à-vis Palestine as if they were a protectorate. I think this is the responsibility that the EU should take on when recognizing the Palestinian state.
Dziękuję, panie pośle.
Thank you very much. Now, EFDD. Over to you, 1 minute.
Thank you. This is a very serious situation, as we all know, and of course we all want a fair resolution for both sides. And this can only be done through serious international diplomacy. I would suggest national diplomacy, but I do hope that everyone's diplomacy works. This is far too serious. It's too serious as well for gesture politics, and yet everywhere I go, at home and here, I see those on the left making gesture politics, queuing up to expose their bleeding heart about this, and then not having the courage to take questions on the issue when someone wants to discuss it with them. Well, I say to you, back in Dudley, where I come from, where the Labour group is trying to make a motion to ban the purchase of goods from Israel, another absurd gesture, you cannot do these things. This is far too serious. Have some grown-up political thought for once and allow the diplomats to do what's required. These are people's lives and not just your gestures.
Thank you. Jako ostatnia...
Now the last speaker, Mrs. Cristina Morvai, non-inscrit.
Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you. Dear High Representative, dear colleagues, since the first Intifada, since 2000, there has been 125 Israeli children, victims, as a toll of this bloody conflict, and 1,450 Palestine children were killed by the Jewish state. You call the Hamas as a terrorist organization. My question is, if it's a logical idea to say if Hamas is a terrorist organization, as you say that, then the Jewish state can also be called as a terrorist state. And it's a logical question, if you wish to negotiate with a terrorist state, if you would like to keep it in a associate status. Don't you think, High Commissioner, that we should at least suspend the associated status of Israel, which is obviously a terrorist state, murdering children and occupying land?
Dziękuję bardzo, a teraz...
Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the Vice President, Mrs. Mogherini.
Proszę bardzo, w jakim trybie?
What's the procedure then?
Microphone, please.
I've been here since the beginning of the debate. I've been asking for the floor. Others were given the floor, so I'd like to protest at the criteria for selection of speakers for Catch the Eye.
Pani poseł, z każdej grupy politycznej.
Every political group got one speaker. I chose one speaker per group in the order they wanted to take the floor. This is all very transparent. Now, Mrs. Mogherini has the floor.
Proszę.
Under our rules of procedure, the catch the eye procedure is supposed to be for individual members, not for spokesmen of political groups. I know this because I was the rapporteur that introduced this into our rules of procedure many years ago. It is supposed to be for individual backbenchers, not spokesmen of political groups. And if you say you've taken one backbencher per political group, then that is discriminatory against the backbenchers from the large groups. It favours the backbenchers from the smaller groups and the non-inscrits. So that is not a correct application of the procedure. Thank you.
Takie przyjęliśmy zasady.
These are the rules we have now adopted. In almost every debate, this is what we do. It was by no means an intention of any Vice President or President of the European Parliament to discriminate against anyone. So I've given the floor to those who found their place on the list. The faster, the better. Now Mrs. Mogherini has the floor.
Thank you, President. And let me thank you for the debate. I was surprised when I heard that some of you, many of you, were thanking me. I mean, that's part of my responsibility, my role being here. And it's also useful for me being here and listening to this debate. But I get to our institutional and political relationship at the end, when I will maybe touch upon the way forward. As some of you have mentioned rightly, the need for common work in the future. Let me start by saying that very sincerely and from really my heart, that this debate this afternoon shows not only that this is, as some of you mentioned, one of the most difficult issues on foreign policy in Europe. I'm afraid we might have many of those, but it's not definitely the easiest one to start with. But on the other side, let me very frankly say that this debate this afternoon mirrors the debate that is there in the region. And this is worrying to me, because I think that this debate this afternoon shows that our frustration and even our sense of desperation is deep, and that we risk to be trapped in the false illusion of us needing to take one side. And we could not make worse mistake than this. You will never, never convince me that, and I'm sure many of you, majority of you in this room don't want to convince me, but you will never convince me that you can be pro-Israelis without also being pro-Palestinians, and you can be pro-Palestinians without being pro-Israelis. The best way of helping the Israeli people is to build a Palestinian state, and the best way of helping the Palestinian people is to secure Israel's security. We have the responsibility to facilitate the dialogue between two parts, two camps, and in the two camps to strengthen those that want dialogue and want and understand that they have to live together, that they have to share a land, and that they do share an interest. If we lose lucidity, if we lose our capacity not to be trapped in the conflict, inside the conflict ourselves, we lose our possibility to play this role. And there are not many international actors that are able to play this role. So we are bearing with us a responsibility. You know, what I find dangerous of this conflict is two things. One is that, as someone said, it's too many decades it's going on. I was born when this conflict was already there. We are getting used to it, and this is dangerous. The second element that is worrying, and it's making things very complicated, is there is too much history and too little future in the debate. Also here in Europe, someone said, we are somehow responsible. Barbara Spinelli was saying that. We bear an historic responsibility as Europeans of a part of the roots of this debate. And so here it comes, a debate among us that mirrors the historical, sometimes historical going back hundreds or thousands years, of how you get out of this trap. And I will always remember one of the best conversations I've had in the region, was not with a politician but with a writer, with a novelist, that told me, you know, we are like trapped in a bubble. We need someone from the outside that pinch the bubble and let us out. And this is our role. This can be our role if we keep the awareness of the responsibility that we bear. And it is not only an historical responsibility, but to me, it's a responsibility for the future. So I am, and I will always be, friend of Israel and friend of Palestine, and will always work to show that this is the only way of being friends of both and of each of them. And I would really like that we manage to develop this awareness together, because this is what the Israelis and the Palestinians need in order for us to convince them and to help them being not friends, difficult, but at least make it possible for them to share their land and their future. What is our role? It's not an interference. I've heard someone saying we should not interfere. This is not for the European Union to do anything about that. This is either for member states or leave them alone. This is our role is to also take care of our neighbourhood, of our region. It's our neighbours. For many of our member states, for many of our countries, and for us. It's our sea, the Mediterranean. Middle East is close, and our relations to both the Palestinians, the Israelis, and to many of the countries that are concerned by the conflict are so strong that this is our business. Definitely so. Definitely so. So it's not a matter of interference. It's a matter of playing our role in a responsible and an effective way. I've heard many of you referring to the fact that, yes, we have to discuss about the recognition of the state. We have to discuss about the talks, the negotiations. Still, I feel that many of you might share my vision, which is that neither the recognition of the state and even the negotiations are not a goal in itself. The goal in itself is having a Palestinian state in place and having Israel living next to it. But the point, the question mark that you have debated here, and some of you have said, I don't have an answer, and maybe we all together as an international community don't still have an answer completed on which are the right steps to do in which order. I think the debate this afternoon reflects this very well, this questioning ourselves. What is the right order for our steps to be taken? What is clear in my mind is that we cannot just sit and wait, because sit and wait is not keeping the status quo. Sit and wait is bringing us to closing the doors to further negotiations and to the peace process. It's not going anywhere if we just don't do anything. It's going bad and bad and bad and bad. What are the steps? In my opinion, and what I've heard today, I get this as an element for my future work. To strengthen inside the two camps the political leaders and the communities, not only the political leaderships, but also the communities, because society has a role to play here, that are committed and that are capable to deliver peace and to work on peace. Elmar Brok was mentioning the fact that not all, both in Israel and in Palestine, want the two states. And we have to be aware of that, because more and more, both in the Palestinian side and in the Israeli side, are talking about a one-state solution. And we have to be aware of that. It has not come out here, but it is coming out there. It might not be the case that our vision for the future stays the same for decades. It's deteriorating, also for us. So first, find the better ways to support those internally in the camps, in the two camps, that are committed, and help them showing to their own public opinion that this path is delivering for their own public opinion. And this is the big question mark we have to answer to. What is the best way to strengthen and make credible the people that on both sides believe still that peace is possible there? Second, I believe that we have to, as some of you have recalled, work with the region. This sounds familiar today. It was not as normal only a few years ago, but I think, and that's why the peace initiative in 2002 didn't go far, but I think now this is something we all agree on. We need to work with the countries in the region. And some of you and Madame ALLIOT-MARIE have invited me, but also others, to come back here or to tell today about a detailed plan. I think it would not be probably serious enough from my side, after 3 weeks in office, to come here in this room, in this hemicycle, and give you my detailed plan for peace in the Middle East. You would not believe me, and you would be right. But what I can tell you and what I can share with you today is the main political elements of the efforts that the European Union is doing, which are the ones that I described in the beginning and some of those that I am underlining now, and a roadmap. A roadmap with the Middle East is not really working. A plan, a way, steps that we can work on. And the commitment to come back here in this hemicycle and not only update you with the steps taken, given the fact that I believe that the European Union has a role to play, not alone. Not alone. Because we have to be aware of the fact that, yes, we do have a role to play. Yes, we do have a role to play without necessarily sitting and waiting others to call at us a table. We can initiate processes, but we need to work with those international actors, starting from the United States and from the Arab countries, and from the UN, starting from the UN Security Council. And I would mention here a country that no one mentioned in the room, but is there in the UN Security Council and in the Quartet, Russia, to work together to restarting a process, but not for the sake of negotiations. This is another trap we have to escape. Negotiations are something good because while we have a process going on, violence is less evident or less likely to happen. But I believe that we also run the risk of recalling for negotiations for the sake of the process. And this is eroding the credibility of the process itself. We need the process to bring a result, and especially on the Palestinian side, but also on the Israeli side. The criticism about the process and the talks is, yes, but what does it bring to our people? And we need to make sure that the process and the talks deliver something very concrete for both parts, not in the far future, but immediately. Something immediately. In this framework, I think we can further discuss, and we will do it, for sure you will do it here in this hemicycle, we will do it also with the Member States, and we will do it also with our partners internationally, because I believe that all our diplomatic efforts need to be together with the others. I will mention another point that was raised by someone. We have other two challenges that are really European ones. One is anti-Semitism. I would invite you to work, I know you are working on that already, but I would be ready to work with you on that, because I think we have a major challenge there that puts at risk our own sense of communities in Europe, and we have a parallel risk, which is that of Islamophobia. When we trend to associate, or in our societies, there is the trend to associate Islam and terrorism, or Arab societies and terrorism. We have to decouple the religious element and the political element, not only in the Middle East but also in Europe. And I think here we have a cultural and not only a political challenge we can face. I know very well that as the European Parliament for me is a central body of the European institutions, it also has its autonomy, and I would respect it. So my attitude today and for tomorrow and for the next 5 years, as we share the time of mandate, is and will always be to share, to listen, to decide together, if not officially politically, but to respect your autonomy. The decision whether to take a vote on the resolution or not is your decision. It's not my decision and will never be, cannot be my decision. I will respect always your decisions. I will always respect the outcome of your decisions and try to work together hand in hand. As someone was saying, I will also try to be as innovative as it is possible and hope that you can help me in this. I would invite you to use your power, which is not a little one, it's a big one, to support and to shape this role of the European Union in the Middle East. I believe that it's up to you to work on a united, sorry it's boring, I know, but you can leave I think if you're too bored, united, strong and useful resolution or decision. I think this would be not just a reflection of your debate, this could be a useful political tool for the European Union. So be aware of the fact that this is going to be, as many of you have mentioned, a real contribution to the role and the work that the European Union can do in the Middle East. Don't waste it. Use it carefully, wisely, use it, but use it in a way that can work on the results that we need. We need symbols. Sometimes symbols are part of the steps, but we need to concentrate on what can make the click in the process and restart it again. The lack of hope, the sense of desperation that is there, not only in Gaza, mainly in Gaza, but also in Tel Aviv, also in Jerusalem, is waiting for a push from our side someone to pinch the bubble and let the desperation out and some hope and future in. I thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo pani komisarz.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you very much for the metaphor towards the end. Let's close the debate. The vote will take place next month. Now, the next point is the statement by the Vice President of the Commission, High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. We're going to talk about the 25th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. For the Commission, Mrs. Mogherini has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I would like to start by remembering that today in this hemicycle the Sakharov Prize was given to a man that is fighting not only for the freedom of thought and democracy and peace in his country, just the day after the International Day Against Violence on Women, as last year's prize was to Malala, that this year is the Nobel Peace Prize, together with Kailash Satyarthi, that worked on the right to education, the children's rights. And I believe that this means the European Parliament is keeping a very open and effective eye on the protection of human rights and the promotion of human rights. Last week we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I would welcome the unprecedented global support for the Convention. Now, you know that the European Union has a treaty objective to promote the protection of the rights of the child. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child guides the EU at the moment throughout its actions in realising the rights of the child, as included in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And you also know that it is the most ratified human rights convention worldwide. All European Union member states have ratified it, which means that indirectly the rights are binding not only for Member States but for the action of the European Union as such. And let me here refer to a letter that I have received from some of the members of this Parliament asking for a ratification of the Convention by the European Union. That would turn the respect of the rights of the child from an objective to a legal obligation. And let me say in the very beginning that I am ready to work with Commissioner Jourova to see the possibilities and check the possibilities of proceeding on this way and explore the ways. But let me also say that I welcome very much the Parliament initiative to adopt a resolution on this issue, as well as I appreciate the efforts of the Italian Presidency to have in early December the Council adopt conclusions on the promotion and protection of children's rights. Within the European Union we have done a lot, and I am sure that you are all aware of the progresses that have been made on internal policies on that. But I know very well that under my responsibility lies in particular the steps that we still need to make on the implementation and the work that we can do outside of the European Union, especially when we see how many children are victims of violence in the world, are victims of war, rights violations, and how many children are mostly affected by poverty, and how many children flee from the countries for different reasons. Now, I really believe that we have a responsibility to take in our external action, and I was looking at the figures and I was satisfied by seeing that today children's rights are a priority in 86 of the EU delegations in the world, and 116 have prioritised gender-related issues. And we also know very well how the two elements sometimes are interlinked in the work, especially that we do around the world. We have been working together with UNICEF very closely, especially developing a child rights toolkit to mark the 25th anniversary of the UN Convention. All the EU delegations, together with UNICEF country offices, have presented around the world last week. And in the spirit of the same cooperation, we have actively supported the UN campaign Children, Not Soldiers, jointly initiated by the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict and UNICEF. More than 108,000 children affected by armed conflict have already benefited from the EU decision in late 2012 to use the Nobel Peace Prize to assist children in conflict situations. And this EU Children of Peace initiative has been turned into a multi-annual assistance programme